Just the two of us. And she didn't want to be bored next was unexpected. The planet wasn't supposed to be there. Captain Greg Korn's weathered hands gripped the controls as the Wasp's echo screamed through the atmosphere of the rogue moon, metal groaning like a wounded beast. Every alarm in his cockpit shrieked a different warning, but he'd been flying long enough to know when luck had finally run out. Well, he muttered, bracing for impact. This should be interesting. The crash came in waves. First the bone jarring, bounce across red stone, then the spectacular pirouette of twisted metal and sparking circuits. When silence finally settled over the wreckage, Greg found himself dangling upside down in his harness, tasting blood and wondering if his spine was still in one piece. The wasteland outside looked like someone had painted hell in shades of rust and amber. Jagged stone needles pierced a crimson sky, and magnetic anomalies shimmered in the distance like deadly mirages. Greg had barely started cataloging his injuries when he spotted it, a thin curl of smoke rising from beyond a ridge of twisted rock. Another crash. Another survivor. His blaster felt reassuring against his hip as he trudged across the hostile terrain. Whatever else this day brought, at least he wouldn't die alone. The second ship was nothing like his battered freighter. Sleek Legan design, all elegant curves and quiet confidence. The kind of vessel that never doubted its own superiority. The cockpit had split open like an overripe fruit. Inside, tangled in emergency webbing and looking thoroughly disoriented, was the most stunning alien he'd ever laid eyes on. Her skin was smooth lavender silk, her hair a cascade of copper and gold that caught the alien sunset like captured fire. When she looked up at him with eyes the color of starlight on violet glass, Greg forgot how to breathe. "Are you?" she whispered, her voice carrying an odd liquid quality that made his pulse quicken. "I'm real." Greg had survived pirates, betrayals, haunted space stations, and at least 3 different kinds of explosive decompression. But this was the first time a simple question had short-circuited his brain. Yeah. Real. Definitely real. Smooth corn. Real smooth. She struggled upright, her flight suit hugging curves that seemed engineered to drive men to distraction. There was something about the way she moved, fluid and deliberate, that made him acutely aware of every heartbeat. "You're bleeding," she observed, though her gaze lingered on his face with unmistakable interest. "You're beautiful," he replied, then immediately wanted to kick himself for the breach of protocol. She smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both innocent and predatory. "I'm Nell, xenobiologist, Ligan Commonwealth. I crashed about 36 minutes ago. Greg, captain, smuggler, occasional gentleman, crashed about an hour ago." He extended a hand to help her up. "Looks like we're neighbors." When their fingers touched, something electric passed between them. Nell's smile deepened, revealing perfect teeth and just a hint of something dangerous. "Lead the way, Captain," she purred. "I have a feeling this is going to be very educational." By the time they reached the Wasp's echo, twin suns were bleeding crimson across the horizon. The ship's interior maintained a steady temperature somewhere between cozy and suspiciously intimate. Greg offered Nell the co-pilot's chair, but she chose his bunk instead, settling cross-legged with feline grace. "This is quaint," she said, glancing around the cramped quarters with obvious amusement. "It smells like burnt circuits and masculine stubbornness." "Careful," Greg warned, checking the life support readings. "I charge extra for insults." "I'll pay in scientific curiosity," Nell replied, and something in her tone made him look up sharply. She was watching him with the focused intensity of a researcher observing a particularly fascinating specimen. Her tongue darted out to moisten her lips, a quick, unconscious gesture that sent an unexpected jolt through his nervous system. "What exactly are you curious about?" he asked, settling against the bulkhead with carefully maintained distance. Nell tilted her head, considering. Terran behavioral patterns under stress, adaptation responses, proximity dynamics. She paused, lips curving in a smile that belonged in darker, more private places. Taste compatibility. Greg blinked. Come again? Oh, she said, eyes twinkling with realization. I suppose I should have warned you. Warned me about what? Nell's posture shifted, becoming somehow both more relaxed and more predatory. Her voice took on a lecturing tone that was completely undermined by the way she was looking at him. Glossoglandular excitation syndrome, she explained matter-of-factly. A neural pheromonal response unique to mature Legan females. When aroused, emotionally or otherwise, our lingual glands activate. She demonstrated by extending her tongue slightly, revealing a faint, opalescent shimmer. It makes our speech wetter. Greg's pulse performed an uncomfortable acrobatic routine. Right, that's definitely a thing. Terrans call it slippery speech. Nell continued, her tongue flicking across her bottom lip with an audible sound that raised goosebumps along his arms. You're not the first male to find it distracting. I'm not distracted, Greg lied. This is purely educational. Nell's laugh was rich and musical, designed by evolution to make strong men weak in the knees. You're adorable when you pretend to be unaffected. I don't pretend. I resist. Poorly, she observed, moistening her lips again with deliberate slowness. Greg stood abruptly, making a show of checking instrument panels that were functioning perfectly well. You're dripping on my furniture. How terribly rude of me, Nell said with mock offense. I could be secreting important xenochemical data. Data that smells like exotic fruit and trouble. You notice the scent? Her voice carried a pleased purr that vibrated somewhere deep in his chest. How wonderfully responsive you are, Captain. Greg turned to find her stretched across his bunk like a lavender dream, hair fanned out in copper waves, one foot swinging playfully. This, he muttered, under his breath, is going to be a very long night. I certainly hope so, Nell whispered, and the promise in her voice made his hands shake. Greg had weathered tight quarters with bounty hunters, gamblers, and once a three-headed assassin who snored in rotating shifts. But nothing had prepared him for Nell in lounge mode. She'd peeled off her armored outer layer, revealing a form-fitting silver-gray undersuit that seemed to have its own opinions about gravity and propriety. Every movement sent ripples across the fabric, and every ripple sent corresponding tremors through Greg's carefully maintained composure. Nell sat cross-legged on his bunk, nibbling a protein bar like it was some exotic delicacy, making little, satisfied sounds that had no business being so erotic. Greg leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, doing his absolute best not to notice how her tongue kept darting out to catch imaginary crumbs. So, he said, aiming for casual conversation, xenobiology. That's studying aliens? Her response came out like honey being poured over silk. I study behaviors, reactions, instincts of unfamiliar species. Very hands-on work. She paused, tongue sliding across her bottom lip with deliberate slowness. I find direct contact reveals so much more than theoretical observation. Greg's mouth went dry. You always talk like that? Nell paused, tilting her head with scientific curiosity. Then her eyes lit up with understanding and just a hint of mischief. Oh dear, she said, sounding not at all sorry. I really should have been more specific about the symptoms. Symptoms? She shifted position, somehow managing to make the simple movement look like an invitation to sin. The pheromonal response affects more than just speech patterns. It enhances communication desires, makes us very interested in taste-based interaction. Taste-based what now? Nell's smile was pure predator wrapped in scientific innocence. Licking, Captain. Lots and lots of licking. It's how we gather chemical information about potential partners. She leaned forward conspiratorially. And right now my biology is absolutely fascinated by your biochemical signature. Greg stared at her. You're telling me your body wants to taste me? My body wants to do considerably more than taste you, Nell corrected with academic precision. But taste is definitely where we'd start. She stretched luxuriously, the movement sending her suit fabric into interesting configurations. Legan courtship involves extensive oral exploration. We map our partners through flavor, texture, Temperature variation. Okay, Greg said, quickly, feeling heat creep up his neck. I get the picture. Do you? Nell's eyes sparkled with challenge. Because I'm getting the distinct impression that Terran males are far more inhibited about intimate contact than most species. She rose from the bunk with fluid grace, moving closer until he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin and catch hints of that exotic scent, spiced citrus, and something indefinably alien that made his head spin. We have time, Captain, she murmured, voice thick with that liquid quality that seemed to pour directly into his bloodstream. We have privacy. We have compatible biochemistry. Her tongue flicked out to moisten her lips, leaving them glossy and inviting. We should do something productive to pass the time. Every instinct screamed danger. Every nerve whispered yes, please. Long night, Greg muttered under his breath. Behind him, Nell licked her lips, loudly. Sleep proved impossible, partly because the pilot's chair had the structural integrity of a drunk bar stool, but mostly because Nell spent the night producing a symphony of sounds that absolutely were not sleeping sounds. Soft sighs, pleased hums, occasional murmurs of fascinating and intriguing that sent heat racing through his veins. Every stretch was announced with a liquid sigh. Every shift of position came with a whispered, that seemed designed to short-circuit rational thought. She was doing it deliberately. He was certain of it. And damn if it wasn't working. When the ship's lights finally dimmed to emergency mode, Greg cracked open one eye to find Nell silhouetted against the console, backlit by the red glow strips. Her curves made physics look like a tentative suggestion rather than a natural law. You're still awake, she observed, voice thick with that honey-dark drawl that seemed to coat his ears. Greg sat up slowly, joints protesting. The bunk was occupied. By me, Nell said, turning with a strand of hair falling across one eye. She didn't brush it away, just fixed him with that predatory, curious stare. I was thinking we should engage in cooperative survival behavior. He raised an eyebrow, though his pulse was already accelerating. What kind of behavior? Nell's smile belonged in darker, more private places. Thermal regulation, physical bonding, pheromonal exchange. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin and catch the intoxicating scent that seemed to be growing stronger. Comprehensive taste-based communication. You keep mentioning that. Greg said, though his voice came out rougher than intended. Is that a euphemism or an actual biological requirement? Yes, Nell whispered and kissed him. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was deliberate, exploratory, like a scientist testing the reaction of a volatile compound. Her lips were impossibly soft and slick with that mysterious secretion, warm and sweet with an underlying complexity that made his head spin. Her tongue traced his lower lip, leaving a trail of liquid heat that seemed to sink directly into his bloodstream. The taste was indescribable, fruit and spice and something uniquely alien that made every nerve ending stand at attention. His brain tried to form the thought that this was a spectacularly bad idea. His body replied with a resounding vote of no confidence in his brain's judgment. Greg pulled her closer, feeling her melt against him with a satisfied purr. She wasn't delicate. She kissed with scientific thoroughness and unmistakable hunger, her hands sliding beneath his shirt to map the terrain of his back with warm palms. The sounds she made, breathless gasps and pleased hums, were like gravity for his self-control. Nell pulled back slightly, lips glossy, a drop of that opalescent fluid at the corner of her mouth. She caught it with a lazy flick of her tongue, eyes never leaving his. I like the way you taste, she said with scientific satisfaction. Greg took a shaky breath. Lady, you're going to kill me. Not kill, Nell murmured, already leaning in for another kiss. Just thoroughly research. They stumbled toward the bunk, though stumbled implied more clumsiness than Nell possessed. She guided him with feline confidence, her movements fluid and purposeful. Nell's suit came off in stages, peeled away with the deliberate slowness of someone who understood the erotic power of anticipation. Her skin was silk-smooth lavender, warm to the touch and impossibly soft. Every movement seemed choreographed for maximum sensual impact. Greg didn't so much undress as get undressed by an expert. Nell's nimble fingers worked with quiet efficiency, her mouth exploring newly revealed territory with the thoroughness of a dedicated researcher. Her tongue left shimmering trails across his collarbone, each touch sending electric shivers through his nervous system. "Fascinating," she murmured against his skin, the vibration of her words adding another layer to the sensation. "Your biochemical response is remarkably pronounced." "Glad to be scientifically interesting," Greg managed, though coherent speech was becoming increasingly difficult. Nell looked up at him with eyes that sparkled with mischief and desire. "Oh, Captain, you have no idea how interesting you are." What followed wasn't hurried fumbling in cramped quarters. This was deliberate exploration, every kiss and caress a conversation in Nell's strange, intoxicating dialect. Her slippery speech became more than words. It was song, invitation, and command all wrapped in liquid honey. She mapped his body with scientific precision, her tongue trailing heat and that mysterious secretion across his skin. The substance seemed to heighten every sensation, turning simple touches into symphonies of pleasure. When she whispered his name, it came out as pure seduction, each syllable dripping with promise. Time stretched and compressed around them. The failing life support hummed its mechanical lullaby while stars wheeled beyond the cracked viewport. Static crackled from the intercom, but it might as well have been music for all the attention they paid it. Nell's research was thorough, comprehensive, absolutely devastating to his attempts at maintaining any kind of emotional distance. She studied his responses with the dedication of a true scientist, cataloging every sound, every reaction, every involuntary movement. "Your species," she breathed against his ear, her words wet and warm, "is remarkably responsive to oral stimulation." Greg couldn't form words anymore, could barely form thoughts. He was drowning in sensation, in the taste and scent and impossible softness of her. Every nerve was singing, every heartbeat a thunderclap in his chest. Nell's laughter was like music from another world, rich and knowing and utterly satisfied. "I think," she whispered, voice thick with that liquid quality that seemed to pour directly into his bloodstream, "this research project is going to require extensive peer review." When they finally collapsed together in the too small bunk, skin slick with sweat and alien secretions, the universe felt different, larger somehow, more complicated. Nell curled against him with a satisfied sigh, her body fitting against his like they'd been designed as matching pieces. Her skin still carried that exotic scent, now mixed with the musk of their joining. "Still alive?" she murmured, voice lazy with contentment. "Barely," Greg replied, wondering if his heart would ever return to normal rhythm. "I think you nearly liquefied my nervous system." Nell's answering smile was pure satisfaction. "The night is still young, Captain." Greg woke to lavender skin and the lingering scent of alien nectar. The bunk was impossibly small, uncomfortably warm, and exactly where he wanted to be. Nell stirred against him, making a satisfied sound in the back of her throat that sent familiar heat spiraling through his system. "Survival status report," she murmured, voice thick with sleep and satisfaction. "Alive," he confirmed, though he felt fundamentally altered on a molecular level. "Barely. You nearly dehydrated me. I'm pretty sure I achieved some kind of transcendent state at one point." Nell's laugh vibrated against his chest. "That would be the pheromonal interaction. Our secretions can produce elevated sensory experiences in compatible species." She traced lazy patterns on his skin with one finger. "Consider it a biological bonus." "A bonus that nearly killed me," Greg pointed out, though he was already responding to her touch. "But what a way to go," Nell said with scientific satisfaction. Morning light, if it could be called morning on this strange moon, filtered through the cracked viewport, painting their intertwined bodies in shades of gold and amber. Outside, the hostile landscape looked somehow less threatening, as if their joining had changed the fundamental nature of reality. "So," Greg said, running his fingers through her copper-gold hair, "what happens now? When rescue comes?" Nell was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "That's complicated," she said finally. "My research mission was supposed to be solo, strictly classified. The Commonwealth doesn't exactly approve of fraternization with other species. And I'm a smuggler," Greg added. "Not exactly Commonwealth material." "No," Nell agreed, though her tone suggested she'd found his criminal status surprisingly appealing. "You're not." They lay in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The reality of their situation was slowly reasserting itself. They were stranded on a hostile world. Their respective governments would have opinions about their night together, and rescue would eventually come with complications neither of them wanted to face. "I have a proposal," Nell said suddenly, propping herself up on one elbow. Her hair fell in waves across her bare shoulder, and her eyes held that familiar spark of scientific curiosity, mixed with something deeper. "Oh? My research requires extensive field work, long-term study of interspecies compatibility." She traced the edge of his jaw with one finger, leaving a faint shimmer of moisture. "I might need a research partner, someone with a ship, someone comfortable with unconventional arrangements." Greg felt a grin tugging at his lips. "You're suggesting we become research partners?" "I'm suggesting," Nell said, leaning down until her lips nearly brushed his, "that some experiments require extended observation, periods, months, maybe years." Her tongue flicked out to wet her lips, and the familiar sight sent heat racing through his system all over again. "In the interests of science," Greg said solemnly. "Purely scientific," Nell agreed, already moving, "to conduct another round of very thorough research.